Welcome to DW News. I'm Pablo Folilias, and to all of you who are joining us on YouTube and on TikTok, great to have you along with us. It's day 21 of the Iran war. Iranians are marking Nowruz, that's the Persian New Year, under the dark shadow of a rapidly escalating war. And as the traditional celebratory fires of spring are lit, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu sent a warning to the Iranian regime. In the past few days, he's told ordinary Iranians he is watching from above and has also hinted that any uprising against Tehran's leadership might one day lead to Israeli boots on the ground. So let's take a listen to him now.
It is often said that you can't do revolutions from the air. That is true. You can't do it only from the air. You can do a lot of things from the air, and we're doing, but there has to be a ground component as well. There are many possibilities for this ground component, and I take the liberty of not sharing with you all those possibilities.
All right, that's Benjamin Netanyahu there. But of course, the Iranian regime is standing firm, saying they're still building missiles and the war will go on. Now, Israel, though, has always been clear in their goals. They want to cripple Iran's military, end their nuclear ambitions and see an end to the regime in Tehran. But how do they want to achieve that? And what are Israel's plans for this war? And what about Iranians? How have they received this latest threat from Israel? Loads of questions. I certainly have them. I know you guys at home also have them. So please do send them in, and we're going to try and answer them for you today. Now, we also have some great guests coming up who'll help us do that. First up, we're going to speak to Simon Mabon. You can see him there in screen, Middle East expert and Professor of International Politics at Lancaster University in the UK. And we also hope to speak with our correspondent in Jerusalem, that's Emily Gordine. We hope to get her down the line on the show. We'll see how we go there. And of course, I'm here in the studio in Berlin, and over to my left here is my pal and colleague Aaron Tilton, who is keeping an eye on all the comments and questions that are being sent in to us here. So, Aaron, what are you seeing so far?
Well, so far we've seen a lot of comments flying in. Of course, our moderation team is picking them out right now. So please feel free to comment either on Instagram or on TikTok, and we'll try to work them into the broadcast as we go along.
Absolutely, and we'll be keeping you up to date on all the latest, of course, all the developments, because as we know, this is a rapidly changing situation, and we want to make sure that we have all that information for you. I think we may as well just bring in our first guest, who's been patiently waiting there for us. And of course, we need to get some information on and just break this down a little bit, this analysis that we have. Simon Mabon from the University of Lancaster. He's a Middle East expert, as I said, and a professor of international politics there. Simon, great to have you along with us today. How seriously should we take Netanyahu's suggestion that an Israeli ground operation may be needed in Iran?
Well, thanks for having me, first of all. I guess it's really difficult to ascertain how seriously we need to take this. Let's not forget, Benjamin Netanyahu has said a lot of things about Iran over the past 3 decades. He's been very, very clear in his verging on vitriol about the Islamic Republic and its nuclear aspirations. A lot of that turned out to be factually questionable at best, perhaps. But now what we're seeing is the direct striking of Iranian targets by Israeli and American forces. So what he's saying now, I think we have to take slightly differently, in a slightly different way to what he said previously. But whether he's still telling sort of or painting an accurate picture of what's happening, or whether he's posturing rhetorically, trying to strike a bit of fear, trying to contribute to this broader narrative of disinformation that we're seeing around this conflict as well, it's difficult to ascertain.
Yeah, no, it's good. And I mean, what you're saying there, like Iran as well today said that it was still building missiles and that the war will go on. I just said that a few moments ago. And that message was sent by the spokesman for Iran's paramilitary Revolutionary Guard. Now, after that was released, he was actually killed. And so how central is the decapitation of Iran's security leadership to Israel's long-term strategy?
And actually, I do believe we have a photo of the commander in question, so maybe we could bring up our laptop screen at the moment.
So what do you make of that? It's like, so how central is the decapitation of Iran's security leadership, Simon?
Well, it seems to be a pretty central part of the Israeli and American strategy. We know that on the first day of this war, there were strikes against Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader that killed him and killed many of his family members as well, injured, we believe, Mojtaba Khamenei, who is now the supreme leader of Iran. So we've seen that. We've also seen huge numbers of senior officials, be they political or military officials, targeted by these strikes. And so that tells me that there is a decapitation strategy in operation, but it also raises a lot of questions about the extent to which a decapitation strategy can work. We've seen across the recent past that decapitation strategies serve to radicalize people. They serve to bring forward the more vitriolic, the more antagonistic voices, who are then fueled by the fact that they are now in positions of power as a consequence of direct military action. We've seen it with Al-Qaeda, we've seen it with Daesh, and now I think we will probably end up seeing it within the Islamic Republic as well. So there's a big issue there, I think. There's also the other fact that Iran seems to have learned a lot from its 12-day war last year. Iran has dealt with decapitation strategies last year, and it seems to have put in place a number of different strategies to ensure that its broader military strategy, one that seems to have been designed after the 12-day war, can be enabled and can be followed.
And that's actually a really good point where we could bring in one of our comments from YouTube. One of our users, Leonatus B9258, asked, with all the global suffering this war is causing, is Israel in its own way being its own worst enemy?
Well, I guess it depends on how you interpret Israeli security and how you interpret Israel's role in the wider Middle East. For some, such as Benjamin Netanyahu, it's doing what is deemed necessary to make Israel a safer place. It's eradicating the regime that has posed a significant threat to it. And it would say that it's doing the same thing with regard to Hezbollah, and it's doing the same thing with regard to Hamas. Now, others within Israel would say that actually, no, this is nonsense, that Iran did not pose an immediate nuclear threat. Iran did not pose an immediate nuclear threat back in the 1990s when we first heard Benjamin Netanyahu talking in this way. We've heard leaks come out about the diplomatic talks that suggested that there was indeed a breakthrough that could have been reached very, very easily in these latest round of talks back in February, and that Iran, again, was not in a position to acquire a nuclear weapon. So if that's the case, then we've got to think very carefully about the strategy here and to what extent Israel's actions have actually made the region more unsafe, more hostile. And I think in that respect, the question's a really good one, but I think the answer is most probably yes, it has made the region more unsafe.
Yeah, we hope to actually speak to our correspondent in Jerusalem, Emily Gordine. We were just seeing images there talking about safety, which was the sirens going off in Jerusalem, I believe those images were, or Tel Aviv, as a result, Jerusalem, I've just been told in my ear, as a result, of course, of incoming fire from Iran. Just going back to your point there, just about the new supreme leader, because he posted on X, so we've heard from him in that form, and he, one of his messages was it's enemies. He said he's called on the country's intelligence services to deprive, quote, enemies at home and abroad of their security. But at the same time, there's a lot of speculation over whether he's even alive. What do you make of that, Simon?
Yeah, there has been a lot of speculation, and I've had this conversation with numerous friends, colleagues, and fellow analysts who've been watching this situation closely. And there's a whole manner of divergent views here. There's some who say that he was killed in the strike that killed his father and killed other members of his family, his children, his wife, for example. But my read of it is this. I don't think that he has been killed. I think that if he had been killed, we would have heard a lot of noise from Israeli and American officials saying, look, we have killed another supreme leader. Remember, it was the Israelis who announced the killing of Ali Khamenei, and the Iranians denied it at first, and then they later confirmed it a few hours after that. But it was the Israelis that confirmed it, and I would argue that if he had been killed, then the Israelis or the Americans would have announced it. They've been very quick to do so elsewhere. But I do think he's probably been injured. There are some rumors that he's been in a coma, some rumors that he's been disfigured. But I think he's probably been injured and is trying to recover and recuperate. And let's not forget, on a purely human scale, he's lost his father, he's lost his wife, and he's lost children. So that will take a huge emotional toll just on an individual, sort of divorcing him from his position as the new supreme leader.
Now, Simon, as you've been speaking, our viewers have been just seeing images there of Iranian state TV just announcing statements from the new supreme leader. I also want to get your take on how, I mean, we touched on it before, but, you know, how credible is it really that the claims from Israel that it's effectively already sort of crippled Iran's military and nuclear capabilities? I mean, we've also heard the US coming out with sort of similar statements.
I mean, last year they claimed they had completely destroyed the nuclear program.
Absolutely, and then here we are, you know, in March, and they're sort of saying it again in a different way. But like, what do you make of all of that? Is you know, because as you said earlier on, this thing about, you know, information is so key as well during in war times, right?
Yeah, I think we really are seeing a struggle over the narratives, a struggle to shape what is being covered, how it's being covered, the stories that are being told, the information that is being relayed to people around the world right now. So I think that's really important here. I think the point about the 12-day war is really key as well, and that the 12-day war was being used back in June 2025 was justified as a quote unquote necessary step to destroy Iran's nuclear facilities. Now, Donald Trump heralded this as an overwhelming success, though CIA analysts suggested that perhaps this wasn't quite as successful as he initially suggested. So there's a question mark there, but there's certainly the belief that a lot of damage was done to the nuclear facilities. I guess one of the big question marks is what happened to the enriched uranium that went missing. And I believe that was one of the key parts of the dialogue that was taking place in the run-up to this latest round of fighting. So that's one point. The other point, I mean, sure, Israel has hit Iran very, very hard. It has taken out huge numbers of targets, military targets, political targets, and also, let's not forget, civilian targets. And I think that's true. And yet Iran still is able to close the Strait of Hormuz. So that tells me that the Iranian military still operates.
I want to hold you there because I do actually want to bring in our correspondent in Jerusalem, Emily Gordine, who we believe is with us. There you are, Emily. Emily, great to have you along with us. I don't know how much of the conversation you've actually managed to hear, but I do want to bring you in and just ask you, you know, what's the reaction? What's the reaction been over the past few days in Israel to Netanyahu's comments, and particularly about the latest comments that he came out with?
Well, look, I think for Israelis, it's essentially more of the same. They are on board with this war. Over 93%, according to recent polls, support this war in Iran. And I think in that sense, maybe not individually politically, they support Netanyahu, but they support Netanyahu in this war because they see Iran as an existential threat to the country. But I think what you are seeing increasingly so is a certain growing concern over what is the strategy here? What is our exit strategy? What is the plan for afterwards? And if you look at, for example, Gaza, everyone was behind attacking Gaza. Hamas had attacked Israel. It was important for the Israelis to attack them back, to respond to October 7th. But people wanted a plan for the day after. And I think that's where you are seeing a growing concern in Israel that, yes, they're behind the attacks in Iran. They're also in support of the attacks in Lebanon. But what they want to see, and what so far we haven't seen, is a plan for the day after.
Emily, that's great. I think we're going to bring in Benjamin Netanyahu.
We did play a sound grab from Netanyahu at the top of the stream, and I'd like to come back to that. Control room, could you get up the first Netanyahu quote again? I just want to have your opinion on this based on what Netanyahu said about a possible ground offensive in Iran.
We are focusing on 3 objectives. crushing Iran's nuclear program, crushing Iran's ballistic program, and creating conditions which allow the Iranian people to take their fate into their own hands.
Okay, that was actually not the O-tone or the sound grab we were talking about. Do we have the first quote? Can we bring that up by any chance?
And just if you're watching, of course, at home, or we're waiting for that to come up, we are looking at Israel's plans for this war, of course, in Iran. We're on day 21. We're taking a deep dive into it. We've got a couple of great guests, and we know that we've got loads of great comments and questions coming in. I think that soundbite is ready to go,
Yes, I do believe
isn't it?
it's ready. So can we play that, please?
It is often said that you can't do revolutions from the air. That is true. You can't do it only from the air. You can do a lot of things from the air, and we're doing, but there has to be a ground component as well. There are many possibilities for this ground component, and I take the liberty of not sharing with you all those possibilities.
Now, Emily, I'd love to get your reaction to that. You've talked a little bit about how Israel reacted to the October the 7th attacks. Is there the stomach in Israel for the possibility of boots on the ground troops actually going into Iran?
I think that's difficult to tell. I mean, the Israelis have carried out boots on the ground operations in Syria in the past, for example. They've also tried to do the same in Lebanon recently. I think there is a certain willingness for certain operations to go in with boots on the ground, but I think the appetite for that is limited. It's also a question of capacity, right? We're not just talking about, if we're talking about a proper invasion, if you want, like we saw in Iraq or in Afghanistan, then the Israelis would have to do that together with the Americans. Is there appetite for that in the US? I don't think so. So I think when it comes to limited operations, yes, the Israelis have proven in the past to take that risk, that with the willingness to take that risk. In Iran, however, we're talking about, if we're talking about the nuclear arsenal, for example, the enriched uranium, then from what I understand and from what the Israelis that I've spoken to understand, this is not material that is easy to get to, and it is heavily protected. So the chances of actually getting your hands on that would be limited from what I understand. And so I think the Israelis are aware of the risks that are involved. And in general, yes, I would say there is certain willingness, but I think Iran is a whole different ballgame compared to Syria and Lebanon and also Gaza.
All right, I want to bring Simon in before you jump to this, Aaron. Simon, you've been listening there, and Emily mentioned the US, and we're talking, of course, about the statement from Netanyahu about the ground invasion. Let's talk about that relationship with the United States. That, is it solid, would you say? Or, there's been this sort of this issue with the communication of this attack that we saw on the gas field. How do you see it?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. And again, this is something that I've been talking with colleagues working on the Middle East about for a while now. And there's a very serious question about who is driving what here. Is this an Israeli policy to try and get the United States to operate militarily, or is it something that Donald Trump is in control of? And at various points over the past couple of years, I think the relationship, the personal relationship between Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu has been fraught, has been tense. We saw that the other day with the strike on the oil fields, the gas fields, that Donald Trump said he didn't know about and has said shouldn't have happened. And we also saw the infamous photograph taken by the White House official photographer and put out on the official White House channel of Benjamin Netanyahu being forced to make a phone call to the Emir of Qatar to apologize for striking. And the body language in that image, I think, is very telling, with Trump sort of sitting back, steadfast, and sort of looking over Netanyahu as a sort of as a naughty schoolboy, if you will. So I think there's a complex personal relationship here. On the whole, I think they're working side by side, but there's also that personal dynamic that I think needs to come into the question here as to what is driving this dynamic, this escalation. And it goes back to a point that we were talking about earlier on with regard to strategy and with regard to goals. What is it, the end goal? Do the US and the Israelis have the same end goal here? And I would argue not. And I think that that is potentially going to be a serious issue in the coming days, weeks, months, as people try and move this into a ceasefire or an end game.
Yeah, we actually want to hear again from Benjamin Netanyahu. So we're going to bring him in and then we're going to discuss it a little bit further. So let's take a listen.
And I want to close these opening remarks with one other fake news, and that is that Israel somehow dragged the U.S. into a conflict with Iran. Does anyone really think that someone can tell President Trump what to do? Come on.
I mean, what do you make of that? I mean, does Israel really need as well the US to stay in this war?
I mean, he's saying it in all of the right ways. He's playing all of the right notes to really sort of placate a personality like Donald Trump. But I think the thing that we need to stress is that Donald Trump won the presidential election on a campaign of saying that he's going to withdraw America from these quote unquote forever wars. He did that. He said that he would not get the United States embroiled in the Middle East anymore in these types of conflicts. And yet, very, very quickly, here the United States is. So I think there is a question mark here about that. And I don't think it's quite as black and white as the US being manipulated by the Israelis. I don't think that that's the case at all. But I think there are levers of influence that are being pulled through various lobbying organizations or indeed through personal relationships. There are clear strategic alignments that come together. But whether this actually tallies neatly with Donald Trump's original policy promises and his portfolio that he won the election on, well, it's clear that it doesn't. So there are questions that I guess need to be asked.
I've got loads of questions as well. And
actually, one of our users on YouTube asked a question which goes exactly to this. This was from P. Kakula, and they asked, my question is, who will end this war, Trump or Netanyahu? And Benjamin Netanyahu spoke to that directly in his statements to the press yesterday. Could we get that sound grad up and played?
We are focusing on three objectives: crushing Iran's nuclear program, crushing Iran's ballistic program, and creating conditions which allow the Iranian people to take their fate into their own hands.
So the question is, who is actually defining the end state of the war? Is it Israel or is it Trump?
We don't know, is the short answer. I think that they have divergent views. I think that there are divergent aspirations and strategies. I think both have different visions of what a quote-unquote win might look like. And those divergent approaches mean that the end game is very, very different. Right now, would Donald Trump be happy with a win of reopening the Strait of Hormuz, for example? Well, perhaps, although it should be noted that that would be reopening something that was closed as a consequence of the war. So there's obviously an asterisk that goes alongside that. But that wouldn't be a win for Benjamin Netanyahu. That would not address the strategic goals that he's clearly set out. And it seems to me that on the basis of what he said in that clip, he wants nothing short of regime change in Iran, facilitated by the Israelis and the Americans, but enacted by the Iranians themselves. I don't know that Donald Trump is quite going that far. There were points in time during the past 21 days where he's intimated that that's the end goal, but there are also points in time where he said, look, maybe the clerics are going to stay in power again. So again, there's serious question marks here about the planning process in all of this. There are questions about the day after, much like in Gaza, I should add, much like there will be in Lebanon. And there are questions about what the broader strategy is and how to get to that end goal.
Simon, we've mentioned now the Strait of Hormuz a few times, and I mean, it's still blocked, you know, so we're still dealing with that major issue. There are reports that the US is thinking of occupying Kharj Island as a way of opening up the strait. Is this essentially the best way out of this?
I think it's a question about a best way out for whom. Is it the best way out for the Americans? Well, probably, because this is the easiest way of Trump getting a win and relieving the pressure on the global economy. And I think that would be considered a win for Trump, even though there are, as I've said, a lot of question marks there. I don't think that that would be the easiest way of ending the war for the Israelis, because it doesn't meet their strategic goals. It doesn't meet what Netanyahu has set out as the sort of the strategic vision for how he sees this ending. And would it be the way of ending it for the Iranians? Well, no, I don't think it would, because right now the Iranians are saying that this is verging on an existential conflict. This is about the very future and the very essence of the Islamic Republic, in that if it does not if it does lose control of the Strait of Hormuz, if it's opened, then that suggests that, well, Iran's position has been dramatically weakened. If it agrees to any type of end of the hostilities, then well, without the guarantees that this won't happen again, then it risks it happening again in a month's time, in 5 months' time, in a year's time. Iran thinks that this is the end game right now. It has to make a stand, and it has to make it very, very clear that if there cannot be any more military incursions into Iranian territory, and the Strait of Hormuz is its best move, and we're clearly seeing that with the ratcheting up of oil prices.
We're seeing a map
and the
there
pressure.
of Hormuz. I want to bring Emily into this. We're just taking a look there. You can actually see the Strait of Hormuz, the map, and how narrow it is. Emily, with regards to economics, because of course we're talking here in many ways about how the impact as well of this is having on the globe. With regards to Israel and its offensive against Hezbollah in Lebanon, and also this war in Iran, and of course this is coming on the back, of course, of the war against Hamas in Gaza. Economically speaking, what's being said in Israel about this, and militarily as well? You know, is much being said about that, and what impact is it having on Israel?
I mean, it's two separate things, right? I mean, on the one hand, I think militarily speaking, I mean, the Israelis are essentially applying the Lebanon blueprint to Iran, where they're taking out the military leadership, the political leadership, and are sort of, it's like a continuation also of Gaza. And I think when we saw that clip earlier, you have to also keep in mind that that was in Hebrew. He's speaking to a national audience there. It's election year this year in Israel. And this is what he set out to do. He also set out to do to eliminate Hamas in Gaza.
We're just seeing IDF images as you
happened.
speak. I just wanted to, I just don't interrupt you. We're just seeing IDF images at the
Yes.
moment of strikes on Hezbollah targets in Lebanon. So sorry, yeah, just continue. Just wanted our viewers to know what they were seeing.
So Netanyahu knows that, you know, that he might know that certain goals are not necessarily realistic, but he certainly knows that this is how voters that this is how he can catch certain voters. And we've seen that since last year, since before the Iran war in June 2025, where his party was, I think, at about 21 seats in the Knesset projected in the polls. That's now risen to about 28. So he has been able to make gains also from this war. So I think Netanyahu ultimately he's playing for time. He's also fully aware that it's election year. These are fears. He's tapping into the fears that many Israelis have when it comes to when in the past was Hamas, Hezbollah in Lebanon and Iran with its ballistic and ballistic missile program, as well as its nuclear program. So that is one aspect. Now, when you look at the economic side of it, Israel has managed to get through 2 years of war fairly well. Now, of course, that leaves out that we're talking about the Israeli economy is multi-layered, of course. You know, you have the military side, and Israel's military is in high demand, the military products that it provides. It also has a booming tech sector that it can also rely on in Tel Aviv. The areas that have suffered the most is hospitality, tourism. Jerusalem, it's Eid al-Fitr at the moment. It's the end of Ramadan. Usually, Muslims from all around the world would at least try to flock to Jerusalem to visit the Al-Aqsa compound, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is the third holiest site in Islam. The streets are empty. Israel, like the Jerusalem is empty, and it has been so for a very long time. And so you can see the economic impact in that regard. But I think it's affecting people disproportionately. Of course, if the Strait of Hormuz stays largely closed, and it will impact oil prices, and of course, it will drive up inflation. Of course, that will also impact Israel. Also, you have to keep in mind, Israel is already even for European standards, a very expensive country to live in. The cost of living is very high here, and it is putting pressure on families. And so you are seeing certain pressures on the economy, but you don't see, we might see a sort of an economic, slowdown, or even, minus. I think they're assuming that the economy will retract at about 0.5% next year, but they can still keep going, is what it seems like at this point.
Emily, you were out and about today, actually, in Jerusalem at those Eid celebrations. You tell us what you saw there.
Well, it was actually a very sad atmosphere to watch, to be honest, because I've been living in Jerusalem now for 1.5 years. Already last year, from what I've been told, the Ramadan celebrations were very much reduced. They were not what they used to be. And now it's gotten even worse. And that has largely to do with the fact that since the war began, the Israeli authorities have shut the Al-Aqsa compound completely. No prayers is allowed.
The viewers at home are actually seeing some of the images you shot right now. Just so you know.
Exactly. So what you're seeing right now is worshippers praying outside the gates, outside the walls of the old city, because nobody was allowed to enter the old city, which is where the Al-Aqsa compound is located. So a few hundred worshippers did try to meet outside, did try to get as close as possible to the Al-Aqsa compound, to the Al-Aqsa mosque, which is such an important, it's such an important place for Muslims, especially during Ramadan. And what was especially frustrating, I think, to many Palestinians, to many Muslim worshippers in Jerusalem, is that the Western Wall, where Jewish worshippers are allowed to pray, was opened at least for limited numbers. The Home Front Command says that only 50 people are allowed to meet and gather in one point, and that's for security reasons. If there's an alarm, that they can access shelters. Now, that has been applied to the Western Wall, so you are seeing Jewish worshippers at the Western Wall. But
we're seeing images there, Emily, up on our screen as you come up. We're just seeing images there of police, what looks like tear gas and protests today. So maybe you can talk us through those.
Yes. So the footage that you're seeing right now is on the Salahuddin Road, which is the main sort of like the high street of East Jerusalem, and that's where many worshippers had gathered. And from what I understood from colleagues, also journalists who were there, they said that there was indeed a moment where it looked as if some of the worshippers were trying to walk towards the Damascus Gate, which is one of the main entries of the old city, and that is when police fired tear gas at them. But apart from that, the morning went fairly smoothly, fairly quietly. People in East Jerusalem, Palestinians living in East Jerusalem, are by and large exhausted by this war. They've been exhausted by the war in Gaza, by their family members being killed in Gaza, and the fact that they're not allowed to pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque now is almost just putting your finger in the wound. We didn't see any huge clashes. We saw this one particular incident, but apart from that, it stayed quiet, and I think that is also speaks to the fact that people are genuinely exhausted.
And tell us, the police did put out a statement, though, didn't they?
They did put out a statement saying that they responded to worshippers approaching the walls, the old city, which was forbidden, and that's what they responded to. They also said there was fear of overcrowding, which I find a bit difficult to understand, simply because there was the Jewish festival of Purim only a few weeks ago, and that was also during wartime, and there seemed, certainly in Tel Aviv, very little concern about the fact that there was over 50 people there at certain celebrations. But nonetheless, the Israeli authorities argued that it was a measure to bring back order, to disperse the crowds out of fear of overcrowding, and because they had been approaching the gates of the old city, which was, according to a directive from the Israeli police, forbidden.
All right, Simon, I want to bring you back in. You've been patiently sitting there as we've been talking with Emily. Just bringing it over now, we've been talking about sort of daily life as such in Israel. And I mean, obviously in wartime, it's always difficult for everyone who's just trying to go about their daily business. You know, how does this war, I mean, we've talked very much in the sort of geopolitical sense, but, you know, with regards to the war, what does daily life look like, though, for ordinary Iranians at the moment? I mean, how can you go about your daily business considering the situation that they find themselves in now?
With great difficulty. And part of this is speculation, because getting information out of Iran right now is incredibly difficult. I have a lot of friends there. A lot of them I've not been able to speak to. I don't know if they're alive or dead. And that's a consequence of the internet blackout. It's a consequence of the bombardment from the Israeli and American forces. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of PTSD, a lot of traumatic stress that has been induced from all of this. There's a lot of people who've been trying to leave the major cities, but then to go where? And then on top of this, of course, you have all of the anxieties that arose and erupted earlier on this year when there were the protests, which prompted the
Simon, on our screen of just preparations and also preparations in Tehran ahead of Nowruz. And also we've seen how this internet blackout as well. Aaron had an image there up on the screen of, there it is. Aaron, maybe you can talk us through what we're seeing there.
Yes, this is just an image from NetBlocks, which monitors internet traffic in Iran, and it shows that there's been a complete and utter blockage of all internet traffic in Iran since the day the war started. And this is the longest and most severe internet blackout ever to hit the country.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing you were saying there about the human cost, Simon, and I mean, we don't have you know, any official figures yet. I mean, there's a report came out from a US-based human rights organization, HRANA, I think estimates more than 3,100 people were killed, including 1,369 civilians and including 207 children, or on top of that figure, 207 children. I mean, that's a pretty devastating number. What about you? What are you hearing about this, the human cost? You were saying that it's very difficult to speak to people you know on the ground there. So, I mean, it's sort of, how's information even getting out then?
Well, there are channels. There are ways of getting information out. Some people are able to use landlines. Some people are able to use VPNs and to get access remotely to the internet and share news that way. But it's very difficult and it's very dangerous, because if you're found with any type of device that can allow you to connect to the internet and get information out, then that in turn provokes questions about your alleged espionage intentions. And of course, this is in the midst of war, and it comes very, very shortly after a massive protest against the government. So you've got these different centrifugal forces kind of pulling against each other in the context of war, in the context of people trying to live their lives, of trying to go to schools, trying to get medical attention when medical facilities have been destroyed, of trying to see families and make sure that family members are alive and well. And it's incredibly difficult to get the information out. And it's incredibly dangerous to try and get information out as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Aaron, you know, we've been obviously keeping a close eye on this, and we've also got loads of comments and questions coming in from our viewers, because there's so many things that we can break down here. Aaron?
Yeah, and many of our viewers on YouTube are actually drawing parallels to what happened in Afghanistan and Iraq some 20 years ago. And one question was, ground fighting in Iran would be worse than Iraq or Afghanistan. Iran supported, trained, and equipped Iraqi militias that used roadside bombs. What is the analysis of a possible ground escalation there?
Yeah, I think that's a real worry, that Iraq offered a snapshot of what possibly may come. And I say that with the caveats that Iraq was a population of about 30 million people back in 2003, and Iran is in the region of 92 million people today. So there's a huge size disparity in terms of population. There's a huge size disparity in terms of landmass, distribution of people, and, as you say, of skills, of training, of the experiences that the IRGC has. And the Iraqi army for example, did not have that. The Iraqi army had been destroyed, eviscerated during the military operation against Saddam Hussein, and then was immediately disbanded. And then that's when a lot of the real violence, the IEDs, the roadside bombs, the killing, the sectarian conflict, all started to come to the fore. Now, we've not got to any of that stage yet, and the military in Iran is still far, far stronger than many would suggest. There is still a great deal of support for the Islamic Republic, despite the large number of protests that we saw earlier this year. So to think that the Iranian people would just rise up and overthrow the Islamic Republic and welcome in American forces with whom they've had very, very complex antagonistic relations for decades, or the Israelis. The same can be said about the Israelis. So I think the situation, if there were to be a ground invasion, would be incredibly dangerous, incredibly devastating, and very, very disconcerting for the people of Iran, for the troops going in there, and for the wider region. It risks a whole host of things being set ablaze.
All right, I think that's probably the best way we can end this conversation today, Simon, and Emily as well. Great to have both of you along. Simon Mabon, Middle East expert and Professor of International Politics at Lancaster University, and DW's correspondent in Jerusalem, Emily Gordine. Really great to have both of you along today to get that analysis and also just a feel for what's going on the ground there. So thank you to both of you, and also thanks to all our viewers who have been watching us on YouTube and TikTok and sending in your questions and comments. It's always great to have you along. It's so important to get your view on these issues as well. And as you've seen, we've brought loads of these questions in and put them to our guests. So thanks so much from me and Aaron Tilton here in Berlin. Thanks so much. Hope to talk to you soon. Take care, and
thanks for joining us.
Ciao, ciao.